Okay, one caveat before we get started. I am not your lawyer, and this is not legal advice. I'm just giving you this content for your understanding, but this does not make me your attorney. So I just have to make that clear based on my ethics guidelines.
Hey, what's going on? And thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of our podcast. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. This has been, I know it's going to be so fun. I've been listening to so many of your episodes. So you guys are, I just really love how casual and conversational you are.
We love it. And as you know, this is called the Wedding Vendors Happy Hour. So we got to ask, what are you drinking?
Right now, I'm just drinking water because it's just midday.
Yes.
But my favorite drink is I like champagne cocktails.
Oh, there we go.
Nice.
Hey, I
Yeah.
like that. I liked how you answered. It is midday, so we're not going to be drinking old fashions and stuff right now. But I like how you gave an answer to what you do like.
Yeah, it's my new thing now. When I see like a cocktail, I like ask them to see if they can replace whatever liquor it is with champagne or like some sort of sparkling wine.
Yeah.
And I almost always like it better that way.
Like it. I love it. I love it.
I'll have to try that.
Yeah, me too. All right, Anne, for our listeners, can you let everybody know what you do and how long you've been doing it?
I am a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for 8-ish years, something like that. I work with online entrepreneurs, wedding professionals, creators, to help them navigate all sorts of all the tricky legal issues in their business.
Awesome. So I know that you specialize a lot in the wedding industry, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful. And can you give us an overview of basically like what the importance is of having a well-drafted contract in the wedding industry?
Okay, so I have this hypothesis that the contract is the final sales document that your client is going to see before they sign, before they pay you anything. It's literally the last thing that they see. And because of that, you want the contract to be as persuasive as possible. Like you want it to be friendly and you want it to like help book the client as quickly as
Yeah.
possible. And I just noticed that when I started reviewing contracts, especially in the wedding industry, one, it was a little shaky. I was like, oh man, like these are missing some key protections. And also I was like, wait, like every part of this industry is like so beautiful and so well designed. And then I get a contract that's like slapped together. It's like clearly copied and pasted from like different portions and like written in like Word document and like written in like the whatever, like Times Roman font, like just like basic stuff. And I'm kind of like, oh my God, like I feel like there's something out of place here. So I'm just here to tell you that your contracts should be part of your client journey just as much as like any other part and that is from the moment your ideal customer discovers you to when they offboard, all that entire client experience should be consistent, including with a contract.
Wow. Yeah. That is a great way to think about it. And I feel like I need to up my contract game. So I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, I need to. I'm going to be digging into mine for sure. Actually, I'll probably be sending mine your way so you can listen to it. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Well, what are some common, I know that you've seen all kinds of contracts from all sorts of vendors. What are some common pitfalls that you run into as far as like wedding vendor contracts go?
Okay. Oh my God. This is the biggest one. There's this clause called the limited liability clause. And basically that clause says that like, if someone were to sue you, they can only sue you for the amount that this contract is worth. So if they pay you $5,000 to shoot a wedding, they could only potentially ever recover $5,000 in damages. I've noticed almost all DIY contracts are missing this provision. And what that means is it encourages people to sue you because it essentially says, oh, you could be sued for all sorts of different, what we call damages, like all sorts of different reasons. That could be multiples of what you actually paid for the contract. Whereas if you are just going to have someone, if there's a clause that says limited liability, they could only sue you for the value of the contract, which is often far less than it would take to like hire a lawyer and go through the litigation process. And therefore that's like sort of a lawsuit prevention clause. And almost every single DIY contract I've ever seen doesn't include this like really important clause. So this is just sort of an example of when I see this, I'm like, my heart starts pounding faster. I'm like, oh my God. Like all contracts need this clause.
Oh my gosh. And so just to clarify that, just because a lot of that kind of went over my head as far as like the limited liability and stuff. So you see it often says like $5,000 or a specific amount, but it should say like whatever your contract value is.
No. So most contracts, most DIY contracts, and a lot of the like wedding industry contracts that I have seen are DIY.
Yeah.
I would say 95%, which I think is shocking. Because I'm like, oh my God, these people run like, sometimes multi-$100,000, maybe seven-figure businesses. And I'm like, this contract is kind of shoddy. And like, that scares the crap out of me. And there's a lot riding on one day, right? Like, it's not like, okay, like, if something goes wrong, like it'll be totally fine. No, like there's a lot of pressure on these like one day. And so that's why I was like super surprised that the contracts weren't solid when I started reviewing them. So anyway, my point is that most often contracts, DIY contracts, which is almost every contract I've seen in the wedding industry, do not have this important clause.
Oh,
And
whatsoever. Yeah.
Yeah. And because they don't have this clause, like you are basically encouraging lawsuits because then people can sue you for far more than whatever they paid you. And so that's like the problem with not having this clause in most of the contracts that I've seen.
I gotta check if does mine have one? I have no idea. I am scared. I need to look at that. Holy crud. And thank you so much for bringing that up. And speaking of clients, wait, so it encourages them to like, it's a little loophole for them to sue you.
Yeah. So, because if you don't have that clause, they can sue you for potentially like multiples of whatever they paid you. They can say, oh, well, like
dang.
I didn't get my photos and there's emotional damage. That emotional damage is worth like, I don't know, like 50,000 instead of like the 5,000 they paid you or something.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem. It like encourages lawsuits if you don't have this clause. But if you do have this clause, it really limits your lawsuit exposure because if they're going to pay you or if they're going to sue you, like they could only potentially ever recoup this amount. I mean, not definitely 100%, but like very likely they can only recoup this amount. And so because of that, this is like an issue that I see all the time.
Yeah, that is super crazy. Okay, let's dive into a little bit more with the general contract stuff. So can our contracts, like the wedding vendors, can our contracts play a part in a client's decision to book in us? How and why?
Yeah. Basically, I have seen a lot of research that indicates, I forget what the exact percentages are, but like clients are basically more quicker to sign and more likely to sign a well-written contract. So it's a contract that's written in more plain English. The more they can understand it, the more likely they are to sign it. And fun fact, there's one takeaway that I want everyone to have from this episode. It's call your contract an agreement. People are more likely to sign agreements rather than contracts.
Less scary sounding.
Yes, exactly.
All right. And, with the wedding industry, everything is like constantly changing. Every year, new things pop up. So how often should wedding vendors review and update their contracts?
That's a great question. And this is something I harp on all the time. Your contract is not a one and done thing. You're not like, okay, I'm done. Like I never need a new contract. It should be continuously updated, minimally, probably once a year. Probably more like a couple times a year. Whenever you have like a client asking a question about something, like you can just put it in your contract. Some like business policy or something, you can put it in your contract. So like you never have to answer that question again. You can just be like, oh, that's in my contract at this page or whatever. And then whenever you have any sort of like client confusion, like you think something works one way, but the client interprets it another way, definitely put that in your contract. And then obviously whenever you have like some sort of disagreement, some sort of issue with a client, put that in that's usually a good time to revise your contract too. I was just talking to someone who, she thought our contract said no refunds, but then there was like a provision that had something that mentioned a refund. And so that was like an inconsistency that she didn't realize that existed in her contracts.
So she had to provide a full refund or something?
I think she gave him credit. Yeah, she gave him credit instead of the full refund, but like she wasn't necessarily going to do that.
So essentially just like using the contract as a tool to set clear expectations with your clients.
Absolutely. So one, it's to protect you. Obviously, that's what everyone knows. But two, like the way I have designed my contracts is like the first part is the obvious stuff, like what's included, price, like details, just things like that. The concrete, like this is what everyone thinks about. But the second part, like it's sort of like the first, there's a line in it that links to all of your business policies, like the terms and conditions page, but like all of your like policies that you want clients to be aware of. And so that way it keeps the contract itself short because it's only a few pages covering the essential details. And so it doesn't overwhelm anyone when they're looking at it. But all of your business policies are one, thought out, and two, written down clearly for the client in a different section so that they can go through and peruse that at their leisure.
Nice.
This is crazy. As creatives, yeah, like you mentioned, we don't really, well, I'm pretty sure our community, we don't really like dig deep into the contracts. We kind of like set it when we first started and just forget it.
But it's so funny because everything is so detail oriented in the wedding industry. I'm like, wait, this is really important. And it is like people are just ignoring all the details. And I'm like, maybe I can update these contracts.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, I agree. Okay.
Very much needed.
Yeah. So now that we got into like the general contract stuff, let's get into what's changed and like trends for 2024, right, Jade?
Yeah. So are there any new legal changes or regulations in the wedding industry that vendors should be aware of this year?
So it's not really legal changes so much as industry best practices. So something that is very common for photographers, for example, is exactly. You'll want a clause that talks about how are you going to work with social media content creators. Like obviously social media content creators are on the rise. So how do photographers work with them? Can clients hire whoever they want? Does it have to be someone approved by the photographer? Because that can sometimes interfere in shooting. And so that's like something to think through and set clear expectations on.
Yeah, we'll dive a little deeper into that. That's been a big topic with the content creators and the videographers more so. So we'll dig into that. But for 2024, how have clients' expectations and behavior shifted in the past year, and what adjustments should vendors consider as a result?
I mean, I think it's mostly like, especially after COVID, like people are much more concerned about like, okay, what happens if something goes terribly wrong? Like if you can't show up or like, because of a personal situation, or what happens if there's like another pandemic, like something terrible happens. And that could be like a variety of different things. Like it doesn't have to be a pandemic. I'm from Florida. And so in Florida, that can mean like hurricanes, right? And like in California, where I live now, it could mean earthquakes or wildfires or lots of different things. Like we're seeing all of these like different weather patterns. And that's like something to sort of take into account when you're looking at all of these different factors. And how do you make sure your contract addresses this? And this is called like what we call a force majeure clause. And basically it like talks about what happens if there's an act of God that you can't control.
Yeah. The stuff that we added into our contracts from last year's during COVID and all that craziness, I think that's when we all like really dived into our contracts again. Like, holy crap, let's fix it. Should we keep that stuff in there now in 2024? We should. And not like change anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think with all the climate change that's going on, I think these kind of things are, it might not be a pandemic, but it could be like in California wildfire season. It could really shut down things. So.
Yeah, that's true. I do have the little act of God's one. I think we all have that basic one in there. That's a good one to have.
I just remember, I don't remember exactly what it is, but during COVID, like the force majeure wasn't really like fully covering COVID. So do you have like any recommendations just in case someone didn't like copy and paste something from online? That would help with that.
You can grab a contract template from my shop. But generally it should cover it because it's things that are unexpected, things you can't control. It could explicitly say pandemics or public emergencies or content language like that around it. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who didn't have force majeure clauses or anything like that. So that was as far as I know, that was like the big issue. But force majeure clauses should cover pandemics.
So was the force majeure, was that like Is that a typical thing to have? Because I didn't have that in there until
Yeah.
after the whole big old thing erupted.
So it's a very typical thing for a lawyer drafted contract for any industry. That's like the
Wow.
type of thing that you always want to have. But that's the kind of thing that like that doesn't it just a lot of people just DIY their contract. So they found something online or somebody gave them and like the quality is varying. So a lot of these DIY wedding contracts don't have that.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Well, are there any new clauses or terms that have become more critical now in wedding contracts for 2024?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends a little bit on industry. So something like for photographers, things I've seen is the social media curator. Like how do you work with those kind of people? I've seen some people put in language that says if somebody is like if the wedding vendor is harassed at all, they have the right to leave. Like if the
Yeah.
guests like some sort of like if there's any sort of harassment on their part, like that's like something that they're allowed to that they can terminate the agreement based on that. I've also seen something where it's like I think this is really important to have, especially for photographers, that you're not liable for any accidental damages to your equipment or stolen equipment or like an SD card that fails or gets
Yeah.
lost or something like that. Like obviously those are horrific situations that you can't control. And you'll want something in your contracts to protect you in the event of some of these horror stories.
Yeah, I have that actually in mine already. So I guess I'm a
That's
golden
great.
star. I'm a little golden star in this industry. So with emergencies of wedding content creators or their emergence, like the rise of content creators, let's get into it. As a new role in the industry, what additional provisions or considerations should photographers and mainly videographers incorporate into their contracts to address the unique needs and expectations of clients or those people?
Yeah. You need to have some sort of, or you should have some sort of clause that talks about how you're going to work with them. And this is the kind of thing that I'm saying, put it in the second section of like basically you're being your terms and conditions of working together, of like essentially your business policies. But you need some sort of thing like covering that. Like if can the couple hire whoever they want, it doesn't have to be someone that you're accustomed to working with. Does it need to be approved by you? Like what is your sort of comfort level in working with these different social media content creators? Because some people are like, yeah, whatever, I can work with whoever, that's fine. And some people are like, no, it's going to interfere with my coverage. And like, I'm the exclusive photographer. So that's the whole point.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, there's the concept of exclusivity varies depending on the type of wedding vendor. But for photographers, how it applies is usually like, hey, your like cousin Bob can't be getting involved and trying to take my photos.
Yeah.
And also if you're going to hire a social media content curator, like it has to be someone I've worked with or it has to be from my approved list, or it has to be someone I can approve and make the final decision on.
Interesting.
Or maybe you're fine with it. Maybe it doesn't matter to you if they hire a social media content creator.
Do you think that the vendor has that much authority to tell that client, hey, your content creator, if you're booking me, has to be approved on my list of content creators?
So I think in general, I think for all these kind of creative service businesses, we are the guides. Like we are the guys that are like taking our client along. Like we've done this like dozens and dozens of times. Like if you come to me with about your contract issues, like I'll take a look. I know what to do because I've done this several times, right? But if like the client, like you don't know, like you've never done review to contract, like you don't know what to look for. And so I think the guidance is really helpful to be like, hey, like just explain what your policy is and the reasoning behind it. And clients are usually like, okay, like as far as I know, like during the wedding process, like clients hire vendors because the vendors are the experts and like they don't want to DIY anything or they don't want to DIY whatever they are hiring a vendor for. And so I think a lot of them are willing to work with whatever the vendor thinks is the appropriate approach.
Okay, so to follow up with that, I know that I'm pretty sure that a lot of clients don't even read the agreement and they kind of just like they might skim it. They might skim it because then so what if they skim it, they see your little term for the content creator, but then they book you and be like, okay, they book you. And then later on you found out that they booked a content creator outside of, your own list. What do you do?
So, if they sign the contract and it's included, if that kind of clause like that covers the content creator is already included in your contract, they're bound by the terms of that agreement. And so technically they have to follow that. I recommend putting in some sort of like language, and I have this in the contracts that I saw on my shop, that you should, like, there has to be a fee or something if that happens. Like, if you hire a content creator without our authorization, and that is, of course, if you want to have authorization over this, then there's going to be a charge of $250, because now we have to coordinate with this person to make sure the coverage they're not interfering with our coverage. So something like that.
Holy moly. And I know when everyone hears this, man, I'm going to make this a reel right here. Everyone's going to flip, and it's going to like, everyone's going to have this in their contract. Everyone's going to get your contract, Anne. This is insane.
Yeah. I just did a bunch of research and just developed like this photographer contract, which I think is pretty good, although I would love feedback on it. So you can grab that in my shop. But yeah, I hope like this is the kind of thing that like my thesis about what I do is I do a lot of industry research. Like, what does a photographer need? What does a planner need? What does a florist need in their contracts? And like, what are some of these? Like, I literally like look through podcasts and look at like wedding horror stories for each of these different vendors, and try to incorporate clauses that prevent these wedding horror stories. Oh, wow. And I stop once I've hit like, I'm like, okay, I'm not hearing any more like horror stories, any new horror stories. And so I'm like, all right, now I feel like solid that this contract is at least going to cover 90% of the things you're going to face. And so it doesn't have to be just like the stuff that you personally have faced, but like I try to do research about like, what if your industry peers also face, so that you're covered and you're learning from like the experiences of lots of people.
Yeah, this is insane. I wanted to add up another thing with the content creator and like the videographer, photographer. So how would that imply? Because I do have one in my agreement where I'm basically saying like, you're the sole photographer. There cannot be any other, but how does that work if a family member comes in with a DSLR camera?
Yes.
Not their cell phone. So how does that work?
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing that you should, that's also covered in sort of this, what we call the exclusivity clause. And that's the kind of thing that you're going to say, hey, your friends and family can take photos, but like they shouldn't interfere with our coverage. And like, so we retain the right to like tell them if move them around if they are interfering in our coverage, because this is something that happens like at every wedding, right? There's like there's like 10 people, but they're like, I'm an amateur photographer and I want to like take the photos. And so that's definitely something that you should include in your contracts. Now, part of it is including your contracts, and then the other part of it is like messaging it well the day of when it happens, right? Like reminding the bride and groom, or reminding whoever to like, hey, this is something we do. And then like figuring out like a nice polite way to tell so-and-so, hey, so-and-so, like, thank you so much for wanting to take this, but like we just need the space or something, so could you stand back 10 feet or whatever it is. Like figuring out like a diplomatic way to share this information is also equally important.
So with them, would you not add a fee to that too, since they're not technically a vendor, they're just a family member?
I mean, you could add a fee. It's a little bit, I think it's a little bit tougher because the couple doesn't have necessarily control over what their relatives are doing on the day of. And I think like I said, I want your contracts to be part of an excellent client experience. And it's kind of like, I can't imagine like going to a couple and being like, hey, so-and-so like interfered in your coverage, and now that's going to be an additional $250. Like it's one thing to talk about like beforehand with specific vendors. I think it's another thing to get family members involved.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, you don't want them to look at your contract and it's like, oh yeah, we're great, and there's fee. We're gonna everything's a fee.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Exactly.
All right, let's get into more things, Jade.
Yeah. So another thing that I've noticed is kind of increasingly popular lately is destination weddings. So are there any like specific clauses or considerations that vendors should incorporate into their contracts to address like the challenges surrounding that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually haven't encountered a good destination wedding contract, although my sister just got married last year in a destination wedding. I think the biggest thing is if you're flying in, like what is covered in terms of your accommodations and your
Mhm.
expectations of what are you shooting and where are you staying and all of those kind of details about it. That's going to be important for a destination wedding. That said, I don't think that they're too different for from normal weddings.
Yeah.
Right. It would just be the travel,
Travel
accommodations,
cost.
logistics, things like that would
Yeah,
work out. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I wanted to ask you too, are there anything from your research that you've, searched and looked around for planners that they should be looking out for their agreements?
So part of this exclusivity clause, how that applies to planners, like I actually first heard it from a planner who said I was listening to a live with Terica a few weeks ago, and she was saying that she had someone who was like, "Can you work with my like aunt or something who's like a
Oh
show
yeah.
choir director?" And so that's like the kind of thing the planners are definitely going to want in their contracts too, to be like, no, I am the exclusive planner for this event, and you're not going to be working with like other random people that the couple who or whoever assigns you to work with to coordinate the
Hmm.
events.
Yeah, there's a
Beautiful.
lot of generals in the wedding day, right, Jade? You deal with no, Jade's hardcore. She's just like, I'm the boss.
I, yeah, I mean, I haven't ran into that issue where it was an issue without having to being able to diplomatically resolve it ahead of
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Right. So many of these issues, like address them at the contract level, and also be prepared to address them diplomatically when you're actually in person managing this.
Hmm.
I love it. So for 2024, that's pretty much it. It's like the just being exclusive, the content creator whole situation for photo and video, and the planners, making sure that they're the ones that running the show, right?
Well, the takeaway I want everyone to have is think
Okay.
about your contract one as part of your client experience and not just
Hmm.
like
Right.
another like this crappy legalese thing that like you have to put in front of clients, right?
Yeah.
Like think about it as like part of it. Like make it well designed, like make sure it's like like grab a contract template or have a lawyer write one specific for your business, or at least have a lawyer like look over the contract template that you bought. Like at minimum. So think about it as like part of the client experience, call it an
Hmm.
agreement, and think about it as like this is the final thing a client is going to see before they pay you.
Hmm.
So we
That's
want that
huge.
to be like good, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I love that. I never thought of the agreement portion as like your client experience.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah,
an
totally.
important part. So it totally makes sense to make it mesh with your brand and
Yeah,
a
Yeah.
positive thing.
It's the final part. Oh, it's your final part before they just sign it and you're set. Yeah, that's insane.
it
All
is,
right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, before they pay that deposit or retainer or what the full fee or whatever, like literally they have to sign that agreement.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, and let's get into some more specific like contract clauses, if you will. So let's get into like what are some best practices for setting up payment terms and schedules and contracts to protect both the vendor and the client.
Yeah. So the way this is usually done, I think, is that like there's one non-refundable deposit fee, and that's the purpose of that is to like so that you can reserve that date in your calendar. And your contract should explicitly state that. It should say like call it a booking fee or call it like
Hmm.
this non-refundable deposit in so that we can reserve this spot on our calendar and like
Hmm.
it and we're not missing out on opportunity costs and missing other weddings. And the reason you want to make that explicit in your contract is because you want like if there's ever a dispute, you wanted to make it clear to the court that like that fee is non-refundable because you basically complete the action required by reserving that date on your calendar.
Mhm.
Like you don't have to do anything else to earn that first fee, whatever that is. And so this is important because sometimes courts are going to be like, well, if you charge the full amount, like, do you really earn the full amount, right? Like before you completed
Yeah.
any services. Like, okay, that's going to be hard to defend in court.
Yeah.
But if you're like, hey, this is the booking fee or this is a reservation fee or something like that, then that's like very clear. Okay, you did earn that fee just by reserving that date in your calendar. Like, and so that it really defends you from having to ever give that non-refundable deposit fee back. So that's the first part of it. Oh, so and the second part is like, you can collect the next. It's the way I've seen it is that you should have one payment after that. So it's like essentially two payments. It's the deposit and then it's like one more payment, like closer to the wedding date, to like pay everything in full. I think it's better to divide that into three payments. Because I think it's like it's like less money each time. So it's like one, easier for the client to swallow. And like we are in this world of subscriptions.
Yeah.
So it's like helpful to have that option. And then the second thing is like, it sort of, again, further defends you from ever, if that fee is ever challenged in court for any reason, to be like, well, so the first payment was for booking the date. The second payment was for like all the prep work that we did for the wedding. And then the third payment covers the actual shooting. So having these like multiple milestones helps sort of cover your bases and explain why you need to be paid multiple times.
That's huge. I like how you said we're in this world of subscriptions. That's insane because we are.
Yeah, we are.
So would you ever do it? So if there's a beginning, middle, and end for these three payments. So it's like the booking, a halfway mark, and then a little bit before the day you start to actually work. Can you actually do it? Can you do it, the booking, a little before the day you work and before they receive photos or the video?
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely do that. I have noticed that the final payment usually occurs before the wedding, just I think to make it all clear and easier for the clients. Of course, you hold the videography and photos, so you could do that. That's not the same as for planners, for example. Like they need to get paid beforehand. And so these are sort of the nuances, depending on what specific type of vendor you are.
Yeah. And no one wants to pay when they're doing their honeymoon or something like that. They're like, we got to pay this guy again.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, exactly. Get it all done beforehand. And again, that's part of like creating this great client experience.
For sure. I love it. All about the client experience.
I had a random question. Does it matter? I heard you calling it like a booking fee and deposit. Like, does it matter if you call it deposit or retainer fee?
Yeah.
What a good question. You're so smart. So the more you call it like a booking fee or reservation fee or something like that to indicate that you're completing the action, you're getting paid for it by like reserving the date or booking the date, the better, right? Like, because again, it like if there's any reason that clause is ever contested in court, then you can be like, no, actually, like that I got paid for that because I reserved the date. Like that's specifically what it's for. So it's like better to call it like a reservation fee versus calling it a non-refundable initial deposit.
That's huge. So you want everything just to be as clear as possible.
Imagine that. Yes. So, okay, guys, I'm reading this book. It's an old book and it's like so good. And it's called Zig Ziglar's Secrets of Closing the Sales. And he's like a master salesperson. And like a lot of it is like, it's from a different era. It's a little outdated. But the concepts are really like interesting. And one of the things he says, like I literally did a reel about this last week. But it's like, he's like, these are the selling words that you should use. And these are the words you should never use. And so like, I was like delighted to see that on his list of words to use was agreement. And on his list of words not to use was contract. So like, the more we can, all of our messaging, not just contract is one part of it, but the more a lot of our client messaging is persuasive and intentional. And we use words like investment, not price. Never use price. Always call it investment.
Yeah.
The better.
I love it. I'm just gonna trash my contract and book yours. Buy yours. My God. So I want to get into a little bit more about some policy stuff. So ever since, the COVID thing, postponements were like huge and scary. So how should cancellation and postponement policies be structured to be fair yet protect the vendor's interests?
So I say something, let me see what I say exactly in my contract. I'm going to pull it up.
Oh, we inside scoop here.
Yeah, I think I say something like, if you need to reschedule your wedding, we're happy to reschedule it once in a 12-month period. But if we need to reschedule more than that, then we need to charge a fee because, then it starts potentially interfering with other issues. Yeah, so I think that's what I say.
How does that go for cancellations?
Oh, so cancellations is a different issue. Like if if the client is canceling the wedding, then that's sort of they you keep the first payment, the non-refundable initial deposit, you always keep that. And then the subsequent payments, like depending on how far in advance they cancel, like you could return that money. And say, but then if it's like, they cancel a week before the wedding, then you don't have to cancel. You should give at least whatever some portion of that money back because you didn't end up shooting the wedding, or serving the wedding in any way. But like, you don't have to give as much back because it's like right before. And so like you could have booked a wedding or done something if you hadn't already reserved that time on your calendar.
See, I think that's why we put our payments in like twos. Because what if they do cancel it and now that second payment that they paid in the middle, you have to refund that, but you keep you get to keep the booking fee.
Unless it makes sense for that service too, like for planning, if I'm doing a lot of work and then that second payment, like you said, is for the planning that's being done.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I put in the contract, I think let's see what happens for cancellation. Like it depends on like at what time they cancel. So if it's like anytime before 90 days, then they'll get like 50, they'll get I think it was like 50% back. But then after that, then they don't get the money back because it's like too close to the wedding date.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. Yeah, I'm still gonna look into your agreements there, Anne. Yeah. They sound great. I love it. So, okay, I know our audience is going to love those contract questions we asked you, but now let's get into some advice for the vendors, right, Jade?
So what would you say are some signs that a wedding vendor might need to consult a lawyer to update their contract?
Oh, yeah.
So I had a friend who was looking for a wedding photographer, and she talked to the wedding photographer, and she's a lawyer, and she asked the wedding photographer to explain a few clauses. And the wedding photographer came back to her and was like, we're clearly not a fit. Like, I don't want to work with someone as difficult as you. And she wasn't like, my friend is not like menacing or like, she's not like a super like aggro attorney or anything. I'm sure she just wanted to be like, hey, what does this clause mean? So the wedding photographer just was like, nope, we're not working together. That's a sign that you should have your contract read by a lawyer who can explain everything to you, because I completely understand that a lot of it is legalese. But you don't want to lose clients because you can't explain terms in your contract.
That's crazy. So I'm pretty sure your friend knew what it meant, but they wanted to see if that photographer could explain
my
it.
friend No, my friend didn't necessarily know what it meant, right?
Like because thing.
Well, yeah, she didn't tell me like exactly what it was, but like, contracts are specific, and she wasn't like a contract attorney or anything, and so she didn't know exactly what some provision meant, and so she was asking for clarity. And then the photographer was like, yeah, no, we're not going to work together. So
that is crazy. That is some good advice. Make sure you know how to explain something in your contract if someone asks people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, my goodness. All right. And so are there any cost-effective ways for small wedding businesses to ensure their contracts are legally sound?
The cheapest way is to grab a contract template. I sell them in my store, the Business Reserve. There are also other contract template shops out there. So that's like the cheapest way. And that should be a couple $100s to grab that contract template. And that'll make sure you have like at least like a foundational basic document that you don't need to do any research about, worry if there's any missing clauses. Like that's a lawyer written, lawyer approved contract.
Yeah.
That's the most cost effective solution if you're starting out. Like obviously you can invest more as your business grows, but like to start out, like that's all you really need, a contract template for a couple $100, or in terms of the legal stuff, contract. So in terms of the contract stuff in the legal world, that's all you should need as you're starting out as a small business. Later, when you are making a little bit more, maybe $5,000 or $10,000 months, when you're hitting that, then you might want a lawyer to create like a custom contract for you that's more specific to your business policies, and that's more reflective of your brand and your voice and things like that. And so that is something that you can do when you're a little further advanced. And then when you're making, like, when you have more of a budget for this, you should probably be meeting with your lawyers, like, every quarter, twice a year, something like that, to update your contracts. If you encounter any kind of client issues that you want to be like, hey, my contract doesn't cover this, and I want to make sure we address it.
I think that's when you're making Jeff Bezos money. You start doing quarterly,
quarterly updates. Absolutely not.
My goodness.
I'm curious, without having to like gone through like all of the template options and stuff, do you have, like, with so many vendor categories out there, do you have something for like each of the wedding vendors, like template wise?
I'm just sort of starting my line of contract templates. So I have just a few on it, but by the time this podcast episode releases, I will have plenty more for like all these, for different types of vendors.
Yay. Perfect.
Yeah, I think you guys are my first, like, lots of diverse vendors in terms of your audience versus like other podcasts that I have been on are more specific.
Oh yeah, we got the whole vendor community that listens to us, man. We love it. Exactly. We love our community.
And as far as like when you do like work directly with a vendor, like to update their contracts or even do it start to finish, like do you typically do their entire agreement, or do you like prefer to make existing ones like more readable and like basically edit their existing one?
It depends on what they prefer. And so if they prefer that I work with what they have, then I'm happy to do that. If they're like, I don't really care, like this is piecemeal together, like do your thing and create like a fresh thing, then I'm happy to do that. Like some people are more attached to their contracts than others. Some people feel like this is what they're familiar with, and so they want to work with it. But other people are like, it doesn't really matter to me. And so it really varies. But it's kind of like a remodel. I was talking to someone and she was like, wow, you like make over contracts. Like they look completely different. Like you like glam them up. And I was like, yeah. So it doesn't, like, even if it starts out based on something, like it'll look completely different by the time we're done with it in a good way. It's like a glow up.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the glow up. I want a glow up contract because my contract is a glow down. Oh my God. So, and what are some resources or tools? Let's get a little bit more into the nitty gritty. What's some resources or tools you recommend for vendors to stay up to date on legal changes and their contracts or best practices?
You can subscribe to my newsletter. I send out like these types of updates and things I think people should know. I also send out like a weekly, like, these are my favorite podcast episodes, like for small business owners. Because I find that there are a lot of good podcast episodes, but it's hard to know which ones to listen to and what the takeaways are. And so I wanted something like this, and so I created it. So jump on my email list, and you can do that because I have like a contract guide for wedding pros, which includes like 3 tips that I think wedding pros should know about to incorporate to improve their contracts. And I think the show notes will include those links.
We got you.
You can also go to like powerhouse-legal.com/legal-resources to access this wedding pro contract guide.
And I'm pretty sure everyone's going to jump on that template. 3 tips for sure.
Yeah.
Can you share any like real world examples where having a solid contract made a significant difference for a wedding vendor?
Here we go. We need some real world.
The thing is, it's really like post haste. It's like, I find that people come to me like after they had a negative client experience, and they were like, oh, I thought my client or my contract covered this or was clear about it, but it wasn't. And so that's why I'm coming to you.
Mhm.
So that's like it's not, I wish I could say that it's like, I have a great, like, I already had a great contract. And so that resolved this client issue. Like, I never hear about those kind of things. Like,
Right.
what I hear about are, oh my God, I had this terrible client issue and I want to make sure my contract prevents that in the future. Like
Mhm.
this SD card failure, like, oh my God, like somebody lost their SD card.
Yeah, that's huge. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to get a little bit more into some things for the vendors here. How can vendors ensure they are continually improving their contracts and legal knowledge to adapt to the changing market?
It's consult an attorney. Like,
Yeah.
you can Google around and do all the research, but it's a lot to stay on top of in
Yeah.
terms of also running your business and doing all the things you need to get done for client service. So I would say have an attorney that's like regularly updating you. Either maybe they're on their newsletter or through blog posts or through their social media content, whatever, or maybe you're setting up calls with them so that you can go over anything you need to know or any updates you need to have on your contract. But definitely at least have like an attorney that you're following somewhere, to stay on top of any kind of legal things you should know about.
And I just have a random question for that too. Are there something that vendors should be looking out for when they're speaking to a attorney? Any warning signs? Any tips for that?
The more experienced and practiced an attorney is in the wedding industry, the better they'll be able to create a good contract, because they'll be
Yeah.
able to know sort of the nuances of these things. Like, hey, photographers, you might want to have a clause about the social media
Mhm.
curators and what working with them. So those are the kind of, like, the thing about working with an attorney, one, make sure that you like working with them. Like, I find that always makes it easier when someone likes to call you or thinks of you as a trusted business advisor. And then two, the more experienced they are in the wedding industry, the better your contract will be, because they'll know sort of the ins and outs of what to include and how
Mhm.
all these
Yeah.
nuances vary, depending on the type of vendor you are.
AKA book and to check
Yes,
it out for you.
absolutely.
And then I had another question for vendors that I'm pretty sure I've dealt with, Jade's dealt with, and I'm pretty sure everyone else has dealt with this. How do we deal with a situation where we have a lawyer client and they want something changed in your contract?
Hear them out. Like, if it seems reasonable, then you can incorporate those kind of changes. But if you're like, yeah, actually, I'm not going to do that. Like, for example, this is kind of crazy. I can't imagine that a lawyer would want the copyright to all of the photos, like for commercial use or something. Like, that's the type of thing they're being like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like,
Yeah.
then you can be more explicit, about not incorporating those edits. Like, if it's like something small, then that's okay.
Yeah.
But think about what they're asking about.
Mhm.
So, and if I think that if you can make the client happy, great. But like, if that's not a reasonable expectation, then lay your boundary in a firm but friendly way.
Good
Yeah.
advice.
That's really good advice right there.
What is, like, if you could just give like one piece of advice to wedding vendors listening about their contracts as we head further into 2024, what
Mhm.
would that be?
Call it an agreement, not a contract.
Simple.
Really, just like that's, when I think about all the changes you can make, like that's something that's going to take you 2 minutes, 5 minutes to update, and it should set a better tone. And remember to call it an agreement when you're communicating with clients. And if that's the only thing you do this year, do that. Like, that's super simple. And so, like, legal can be very intimidating and very confusing and complex. And like, I feel that way, and I'm a lawyer, so I can't imagine how normal people feel. And so that's the kind of thing that if you get the ball rolling, started like that, then it's easier to tackle the next harder legal thing of like, maybe I want to update some of these terms, or maybe I want to like take a look at my contract and see if it's still reflective of my business.
Mhm.
So you can like get the ball rolling little by little to tackle this sort of unfun project.
That's so funny.
Or
I feel like us vendors, when we put our contracts out, we try to put in all that legal jargon because, we're not lawyers. They're just like, oh, we put it in. But
Yeah.
then the lawyers are like, you need to make this sound more like you, like friendly and nice to the client. That's
Mhm.
kind of funny to think about.
The thing is, there are phrases that you should definitely have. And so there are sort of like magic phrases or like legal phrases that if you have, that's like good. That's what's going to protect you. But you don't need all of the legalese. And like,
Yeah.
I just think that yeah, I think there's an incredible opportunity for lots of creative industries, but especially the wedding industry, to have better, friendlier, more solid contracts.
I love it. You heard it from Anne. Make it simple, make it clear, and then book her. All right.
Yeah.
All right, Anne. So we want to get into a fun little game called
Okay.
This or That.
Perfect.
So this is just random stuff. You just spit
Rapid
what answer you
fire.
hear. Rapid
Okay.
fire.
Let's
All
go.
right, go for it.
Coffee or tea?
Copy.
Early bird or night owl?
Definitely early bird.
Ooh.
Android or iPhone?
Both. I have both.
Oh, dang.
Oh.
She got a burner. She got a burner, people.
I have one for my work phone is my iPhone, and then I have a personal as Android. I like having both.
All right, smart. All right, fly or breathe underwater?
Fly.
Yeah.
Simple language or legal jargon?
Obviously, simple language.
Netflix or HBO?
Netflix.
Email or phone call?
Tough one. Different context. I probably phone call.
All right. Crunchy peanut butter or smooth?
Crunchy.
Crunchy.
Large or intimate wedding?
I had a large wedding, so I'm gonna go large, but intimate weddings are amazing.
Yeah. Book smart or street smart?
Both.
All right.
Travel 50 years in the past or 50 years in the future?
50 years in the future, man. I don't know what this world's gonna look like.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. Comedy or drama?
Comedy.
Comedy.
Forget everything you know or forget everyone you know?
Forget everything I know.
Oh. Cats or dogs?
It's really tough, but I'm gonna go with dogs.
All right.
DIY contracts or hiring a lawyer?
Hire a lawyer or grab a contract template.
There you
Please
go.
don't DIY.
And the last one, go to prison or spend the rest of your life on the run from the police.
Spend the rest of your life on the run from the police.
Yeah. The run. All right. So fun. We love doing those things.
Yeah.
That was rad. And then, Anne, our last and final question we love to ask every guest is if you could choose any superpower to have you in your line of work, what would it be and how would it help you?
In my line of work, I think in my line of work, it would be helpful to know what my clients' worst fears are so that I can address them either like verbally, like if I need to reassure them and say, be like, hey, that thing you're thinking about, like, I don't think it's going to happen. Or, hey, thanks for alerting me. Let's figure out a solution to that. So that's that's probably the superpower I would want.
So would it be like a mind reading power or would it just be like a sense? You have a sense of what they...
Just their deepest fears. Yeah.
Yeah, like, hey, I'm coming to you with this contract and I'm like really afraid that like someone's going to cancel this wedding, like, 2.5 months out. And so I'm going to have to like refund a portion of it, but also it's going to be harder to book another wedding at that time, like that kind of thing.
They would come up to you and be like, hey, they were like, hey, I have a question. And you're like, oh, I already wrote the contract. Here it is. I know what you're afraid of. Like, oh, thanks.
Ready to go.
Ready to go.
Right.
Love it. All right, Anne, can you let the listeners know where they can find you?
Yes, please follow me on Instagram at Powerhouse Legal. And then you can please sign up for the Wedding Pro contract guide with 3 tips for wedding pros at powerhouse-legal.com/legal-resources. So that's all clear when you get to my website, where to get the free resources. So, or I hope it's all clear. So let me know if it's not.
And we will put all of that in the description below.
Definitely. All right, Anne, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.